Well, hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
We're back.
We are back.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leanne.
And hello, everyone. I'm Jason. And this
And
is Let's Talk.
this is a space where no topic is off limits, where we will discuss things from well-being to resilience, leadership, money, relationships, mindset, and so much more.
And always here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real stories, and honest conversations because the things that we most often don't talk about really end up being the things that are the most important to talk about.
Yeah. And our goal here is simple. It really is to spark new ideas, to shift mindsets, to give you practical tools and tips that you can use in your life and in your leadership.
Absolutely. So, whether you're tuning in for inspiration, growth, or just a fresh perspective,
Let's talk.
today we are exploring something that shapes not just what we do, but who we become: occupational and professional well being.
Yeah. And our theme for today is to work with purpose and finding fulfillment in what you do. And we're bringing, as usual, a bit of neuroscience and emotional intelligence to help explain why purpose at work isn't just a luxury, it's a biological need, it's a necessity.
Absolutely, absolutely. I so wish I had this podcast a number of times in my career, actually. So we'll definitely be bringing in our personal stories and learnings along today's conversation journey.
Absolutely, because we've all worked, right? And we've worked with purpose. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly worked without purpose, and that just does not feel great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had both experiences myself. And definitely when you work with purpose and fulfillment, it's like just so much greater and just such more of an internal good feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so with that, occupational well-being is more than liking your job, right? It's the state where your work feels both meaningful, aligned, and energizing, which if you have all three of those, just imagine how good that would feel.
Yeah, I love that. Meaningful, aligned, and energizing, right? Like it's
Yeah.
such a it's like the trifecta, of of loving what you do. And
Absolutely.
and what we're going to do is bring in some neuroscience as usual, because when our work aligns with our strengths and our values, the brain's dopamine and serotonin pathways, which are the feel good chemicals, that gets activated. And that helps us to build in motivation, satisfaction, and stability. And we feel good, just generally feel good about what we do.
Yeah. And exactly, Leanne. And it's not about constant happiness. It's about the brain saying, this is right for me. I mean, like, just think about this, right? If your brain is like, this position, this situation is right for me, versus just the constant happiness, there's something in that. And so I ask folks to pause for a moment and think about that.
Mm. Because if it's not right and if we're misaligned, we see the opposite of the feel good chemicals. We get
Mhm.
cortisol, which rises. The amygdala goes on high alert, which is, the alarm system of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's responsible for decision making, creativity, collaboration, um, all of those things basically shut down if we're not in that toward state. If we're not feeling good about what we do, then that thinking part of our brain, our executive functions, go offline. And
Mhm.
yet we need those executive functions to do our jobs well.
Absolutely. So, if you think about occupational well-being, it's literally brain well-being, right? And you can take that and if you've watched our previous episodes, right, there's linkages to this entity of brain well-being that we've talked about in the last 7 episodes. So just remember that occupational well-being is literally brain well-being.
Yeah. And because, neuroscience is my sweet spot, I'll double click on a few of these things as we go through today because our brain drives everything that we do. And
Mm-hmm,
when our brain is in alignment, it does good work, it works for us. But we also know that our brain is constantly looking for threats in the environment, right?
mm-hmm,
And if we're showing up in places where we're not working with alignment, our brain sees that as a threat and it creates all sorts of problems for us because its job is not to make us happy. Its job is to keep us alive and safe. So it's going, warning, Will Robinson, warning consistently. And then we can't do the tasks well that we're meant to do. It's also why when we work with alignment and purpose, it feels energizing. And work that doesn't feel um, that isn't alignment filled or purpose filled actually feels heavy on your nervous system, right? Because you're consistently in this threat state. So it feels heavy. And the question that I often ask myself in lots of situations is, does this uplift me or does it diminish me? And this is the sort of questions we need to be asking ourselves right now, not just at work professionally, but everywhere, right? In all avenues. Because if something doesn't uplift you, if it doesn't energize you, if it
mm-hmm.
doesn't feel aligned, it's going to be diminishing who you are. And none of us want to show up in a diminished version.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
So, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go for it.
So, you know, there's a lot to that, about showing up, in your full authentic version, or as authentic as you can be, right, in like a professional setting versus showing up in that diminished version. I mean, it's amazing because it just even makes me think back kind of in the totality of my own career, right, in my own professional career, and how many times that I felt diminished, um and and there was definitely times where like I know that I felt that in the moment, and then there was other times where it was kind of a reflection, right, of like, oh wow, like I'm not really showing up as my full potential. I'm showing up very kind of in a box, for a variety of reasons. And it just makes me feel like, gosh, if I had something like this podcast, like this particular episode, maybe I would have made different decisions, or, had more courage, or allowed myself to be like, no, you know what, I am going to show up more my authentic self. And there, it takes that bravery and it takes that courage, and everyone might not align, but that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah, because then we get into people pleasing mode, right? And
Yeah,
that kind of um, at the cost of ourselves. And that's not
yeah,
necessarily great. What I will say also about this is that, like looking back over my career, there are some times in certain roles that I've had where I've loved the role, but not some particular aspects of it. And that's not necessarily the diminishing. The diminishing is more when I don't feel that any of the role is actually working to my values, to my purpose, if I feel conflicted all the time. So it's not just about, oh, I don't like this aspect of my job. It's about who do I become when I show up there? Do I show up as my bright, authentic, fun, quirky self? Or do I feel like I'm, a robot on a treadmill and there's none of me actually showing up, none of the true
yeah,
me actually showing up? And
yeah,
I think we need to be really mindful about that because we get into the trap of chasing the carrot, right? We need the money, we've got bills to pay, and we stay in roles for long, long periods of time that zap the life out of us almost. Um, and sometimes, if we're not sure what our values are or what our purpose is, then we're kind of on a boat that's rudderless. We're kind of being thrown around by the waves and the sea. And some of the work that I've done over the last few years is to get really clear on what is my purpose, and then
Hmm.
aligning that to any role I'm doing, and that becomes interesting. So it's not, it's not just about the role, it's about how can I align my purpose to the task that I'm doing right now, even if the task itself is not something I enjoy. And
Right.
that has brought a significant shift in everything that I do and the way I show up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, with that, there's some warning signs that our brain actually puts out to us when we are professionally misaligned. And the first one that I'd like to chat about is chronic dread. Now, what does that mean, right? So, chronic dread is when your brain anticipates something unpleasant, which we've all been there, right? Um, and the amygdala fires early, creating what we feel as those Sunday scaries, right? Like, how many of us is like, oh my gosh, it's Sunday night at 6 o'clock, and that dread of having to go back to work, um, versus pausing and thinking of those times of when you're like excited and motivated. So there's that difference there, and that's when you got to pay attention to what your brain is telling you and kind of get in touch with that. And that's where that self awareness comes in.
Yeah, I've definitely had the Sunday scaries in my time.
Me too.
Oh, I don't want to go back. No. Oh dear. Number two, of these things that show up when we're in misalignment is emotional exhaustion. And that's not just laziness. Like, it's not that we're lazy. It's actually that prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain is fatiguing because it's constantly overridden by stress. So we feel zapped of energy all the time. It's like this chronic exhaustion that shows up where we're just not energetic, we're just not enjoying any parts of life, because it doesn't just limit to the work.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it flows on and impacts the other parts of our lives as well. So that emotional exhaustion is something we really need to take a look at, because if I'm emotionally exhausted all the time, if I feel zapped of energy all the time, it's because
Mhm.
I'm under duress and stress all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And number three is around when achievement doesn't feel rewarding. And I know we all, if we take a pause, we can all take a step back and be like, yeah, like I felt that, right? Within different positions or different parts of our career. And when your work is misaligned, the dopamine system in your brain does not activate. So it doesn't give you that feel good, like, oh my gosh, like I've just accomplished this big project and I feel so good about it. And you want to talk about it and you're smiling, etc. So when you don't get that dopamine activation, that tells you something, and even when it's eternal success. So that's another thing, like you were just talking about that, about the emotional exhaustion. There's also this when that achievement doesn't feel rewarding, and that's saying something. So our bodies do give us a lot of signals. We just got to be aware of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that blah feeling all the time, right? Like there's no highs. Um, which leads to the next one, which is that detachment or numbness that we can
Hmm.
often feel. And that's where your brain's protective response is kind of shutting down, because your nervous system goes into this conservation mode because it can't endure the stress, and the cortisol that's kind of going rampant in your body. So you become numb, you become detached, you become almost uncaring, like there's no buy-in anymore, no emotional buy-in to what you're doing. And again, it doesn't just stick to the work thing. That has a flow-on effect to the other areas of your life as well. So then your family are noticing this detachment or numbness. Your friends are noticing it. Your colleagues are noticing it. But more importantly, you're numb. you're not
Hmm.
experiencing life. Like you're not experiencing the highs and the lows. And let's face it, nobody wants lows, but nobody wants numbness. You'd rather have the extremes, and travel in
Hmm.
between them than to be this constant kind of flat line. Like that's not living, that's just existing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with these four areas that we just talked about, we don't want you to think of them as failures because they're not failures. What they are neurological indicators that something deeper is going on and needs attention.
Yeah.
And that's when, if you have that deeper sense of self awareness, be able to take a pause and a step back, you can get in touch with what those neurological indicators are telling you versus just, sweeping them under the rug and going on about your day.
Yeah.
So, um, so it's that paying attention to your body and what your body and your brain is telling you is so, so super important.
Yeah. And we're not taught to be aware of what's happening
Mm-mm.
internally. Like this is not something that we're taught as young children through school. If anything, we're taught to kind of shut down anything that doesn't fit the box, right? Like, like we're not told to lean in and feel the feels. We're not taught any of that sort of stuff. So most of us do suppress
Mm-hmm.
and we do put those things under the carpet. But the problem with suppressing how we actually feel is that it heightens all of the issues. So when we're trying to suppress how we feel, our blood pressure goes up, our stress levels go up, our cortisol and adrenaline, like the chemicals, the not so good chemicals, flood our body. And we infect the environments around us because emotions are contagious, right?
Yeah.
So, suppression and numbness and not actually leaning in is not the answer. The only way out is through. And what I mean by that is that we need to start paying attention. We've talked about this, Jason, in some of our previous podcasts about the need for self awareness to
Mm-hmm.
actually check in and go, hang on a second, my heart is palpitating at the moment, or my stomach feels tight, or my mouth has gone dry, or I have this headache up the back of my head all the time,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably stress. Like your body tells you. And if you don't listen to the subtle signs, what eventually happens is that it'll come up and smack you upside the head with something big because
Yeah.
we're just not paying attention. We're just not paying attention. And then all of a sudden, we have a massive health crisis or something because we've been ignoring the subtle signs along the way. So looking within is so important, especially when it comes to our stress levels. And unfortunately, we spend more time at work than we do anywhere else, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, we've got to make sure that we're living with purpose and alignment when it comes to our occupational and professional well-being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think this is a perfect time to break down what purpose actually means from a biological standpoint.
Yeah, because purpose actually activates the default mode network. It's the part of the brain that connects to memories, to your identity, and to your future goals. So when we're working with purpose, we're kind of aligning those three things. What we know from the past, who we are today, and how we want to be in the future. And aligning those three has us feeling pretty good about ourselves.
Absolutely. So when we do work with what feels meaningful, the brain literally ties it into our sense of self, right? And like, I think there's so much with that is like when you have that sense of self, how much can actually happen when you're actually in that space and connect to that space versus in that misaligned disconnected space.
Yeah, absolutely. And, why I think that's so important and why this is such a valid conversation is because when we work with purpose, it decreases our stress. Now, people often say that burnout is because of overwork. And studies have shown that that's not actually the case. right? Because if you're passionate and inspired about what you're doing, you could work for 20 hours a day and still feel energized. So
Mm-hmm.
studies show that when people understand their why, they what the why they're doing something, the amygdala calms down, that emotional part of the brain calms down, and the prefrontal cortex stays online for longer. So we can do the tasks that we're meant to do. We've got all of our internal systems firing in a positive light, and we get into that flow state.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why purpose driven people actually have a higher sense of resilience,
Mm.
right? It's because their brain interprets challenges as meaningful instead of threatening, right? So, I mean, I can think back my own self on those times when I didn't really feel like I was working within my area of purpose. And so, my brain probably at the time was interpreting these challenges as more threats than actual entities of being meaningful. And how can I take that and steward it to like something positive or, something great, right? Instead of staying in that threat state.
Yeah. Yeah. And resilience is about the ability to be able to bounce forward, right? So if we're working with purpose, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, yep, challenge accepted. I'm going to overcome that, right? It's like, come on, bring it on. But when we're not working with purpose, every speed hump feels like a roadblock.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. It feels like, oh God, now what? Yeah, as opposed to come on, bring it on. So it's interesting how that slight shift can, even though the work itself or the challenges might not change, the way
Mm-hmm.
we approach it changes when we're purpose aligned. And purpose isn't just one thing, it's a combination of several things. Um, and so the first one is when we're working with purpose, it's usually that we're good at what we do because it aligns to our strengths, right? We're playing to our strengths. It energizes us because of that dopamine that we get in the brain, right? So we feel more energized and we can do more for longer. It
Mm-hmm.
aligns with our values, which is all about our identity. So we feel like we're showing up and we're being authentic. And it helps us to contribute to others. And when we contribute to others, we get the feel good chemicals of oxytocin, which is related to connection, right? It's the feel good chemical of a relationship. So when we're aligned with purpose, it's usually those four things that are happening. Yes, we're good at what we do. Yes, we feel good about what we're doing. Yes, it's aligned to our values. And yes, we're contributing to the well being of others. And bringing those four things together really shifts um, how we feel. And again,
Mm-hmm.
the ripple effect of that impacts those around us and how they feel.
Absolutely. And, to build onto that, Leanne, when all four of these activate together, right, it creates a state, what psychologists call eudaimonic well-being. Say that word 10 times, right?
Yeah, I'm not
Eudaimonic
even going to try
well-being.
it once. Eudaimonic.
um, this eudaimonic well-being, which is the deep and lasting form of fulfillment. So it encompasses purpose, meaning, fulfillment, growth, and self-actualization. So eudaimonia is about thriving, not just feel good, because feel good can be in the moment, but when you're thriving, that's the more lasting kind of, you know, long term that you can see down the road is when you're thriving. Not, I mean, not saying you're not going to have bumps in the road, right? Because we all do, and that's just part of being a human, right? And the experience. But having that sense and that feeling that you're in a thriving state, just in a feel good state, because that feel good can be moment to moment, is so much more long lasting than just those micro moments of like, oh, yep, I feel good about this. And then you go into the bull, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about when those are all four activating together, you're in a thriving state. So you have that purpose, meaning, fulfillment, growth, and self-actualization that's occurring, um, like in that circular motion. So, um,
And people that are in that thriving state are magnetic,
mhm,
right? Like other people want to be around that because they feel good, they're exuding good energy, they look good, right? Like they have joy coming out of their pores and their skin almost. It's almost like it's magnetic when people are thriving, as opposed to those momentary feel good sessions, which
mhm,
feel good in the moment, but then there's deep seated, not so feel good underneath that, right?
yeah,
Thriving is that generally we're vibrating at a higher level and it attracts a whole lot of stuff to us.
yeah,
I've in my own experience with that, I've had people say to me when I've been thriving, and I've had experiences of both when I've been thriving and when I haven't. But when I'm thriving, people actually say, "Oh my God, you look well." And it's like,
mhm.
it's funny because I haven't changed anything about the way I look, right? I haven't. I haven't got new clothes or new makeup or anything like that. But, you look well because you're exuding this positive energy.
Yep,
You feel well. Like you don't come down with ailments, health issues. Um, and and it doesn't matter what comes up, you can overcome it in that
yeah,
thriving state, right? It's
yeah.
just so interesting.
Yeah. And, when you were talking about that and kind of how, people have noticed that like you look different and right, like what came to mind when you said that, Leanne, was that like I think there's like an energy shift, right? That when you're in a thriving state, your energy is different.
Yeah.
I mean, you may have not changed anything like, hair, makeup, if you wear makeup, clothes, but there's just a different energy that's present that people can feel,
Yeah.
right? Versus like, I don't know, like I kind of feel like those feel good moments, like those micro moments. It's like, okay, it's like and then it's like, then you let the residue come back in, of what was operating. It's like feel good for 5 minutes and then the residue comes back in and then you kind of get in that slump. But that thriving state, it's like residues just down here and you're up here. And so there's that energy difference that popped into mind when you were talking about that.
Yeah, and that's the magnetism, I guess, that I was alluding to, right? It's that energy. And like attracts like, we know that. So the more that you're in that state of thriving, the more that others are going to, come to you who are also thriving.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a different way of working. And
Yeah.
because I have experienced both, I want that thriver more. Like I want that.
Me
I want what
too.
she's having, right?
Me too, and I think as both of us as entrepreneurs, right? Like, like it's so easy, right, to get into those momentary feel good moments, right? Because you may have like this, big project that just ended successfully well, but then like there's nothing in the funnel. So it's like, oh my gosh, has my thriving stopped here for the moment? So, definitely as entrepreneurs, and for those entrepreneurs that are listening, I'm not saying it has to be a different mindset, but there are elements um, in entrepreneurialism that it's so easy to get into those slumps sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, because they always say entrepreneurialism is not for the faint at heart. Because you've just got to be out there, as getting your next client, your next two or three clients in the funnel. Um, and it's easy to get in those slump states when you don't see anything coming in, and so you don't feel like you're thriving.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that, Jason, to be honest, is because for many of us, we tie our self worth to our productivity or to the result,
Mhm.
right? And as opposed to, tying our self worth to our purpose, which might be something different. Because society rewards the output. And it does that from a really young age. Like you think at school, it's not about how well you connect with humans or how well you do certain things. It's what results did you get on your exams, right? And my
Hmm.
kids have just done their end of school completion exams, and the pressure that's on them to perform and get good results, right? Like it's all about this productivity and this performance. And, if we think about this from an identity perspective, that's not what we should be tying our identity to. Our
Hmm.
identity should be tied to the human that we are, how we show up, how we impact other people, as opposed to, oh my God, I haven't got that next client. So now I feel bad about myself, right? Or I didn't perform as well as I should have. So now I feel bad about ourselves. And I think we've got to really disconnect our self worth from our productivity and our results,
Yeah,
because we're human beings. We're not human doings. And yet everything is about the doing, not the being.
absolutely. Absolutely. And from a neuroscience standpoint, you know, it's conditioning, right? I mean, we are conditioned from such a young age, whether you're from the US or, from APAC or Europe or, wherever you are from the globe, conditioning is happening from such a young age. So it's like when we praise um, the achievement, then the dopamine system wires itself to the external validation.
Mm, yeah. And
Yeah,
then we keep needing external validation from others, like, see,
absolutely.
look at me,
Hey,
right?
look at
As
me.
opposed,
Yeah. And I think that's when also people's egos come in too, right? Because it's like you're almost like addicted to that. And then your ego plays into that and it's like me, like praise me because you're getting those dopamine feelings.
yeah,
Um and and then there's that external validation, but then a lot of people don't take the time to pause of like, what are you feeling internally at those times?
yeah,
Like, do those match? Sometimes they do, but then sometimes it's like there is such a misalignment between your external validation and what you feel out here to what you may be feeling inside, because you may be feeling misaligned to whatever work you're doing, or you just may feel like your gas tank is empty,
yeah.
even though you're still getting all this praise out here. In here is not working.
Yeah, and the sad part about that, Jason, just as you're saying that, is that that need for approval from others or validation from others, if it doesn't come, even if we've done a good job and we're proud of it, we
Mm-hmm.
then feel like crap because we haven't received that validation or approval from those external to us. So we
Yep.
need to kind of flip the script on that. As adults, we need to chase our own validation. We need to, value our own work. We need to be in alignment with what we're doing as opposed to chasing it from external sources. Because if we don't get it, that can really impact us. Whereas if we've got our own kind of compass,
Mm-hmm.
which shows us, actually, I feel good about this, and that's okay. Because when we chase achievement to feel safe or valued, um, it's not because we're aligned, right? It's just because we need that validation from other people. And again, it leads to that people pleasing mode, which then diminishes us at the cost of us almost,
Yeah.
right? Like we'll almost scurry trying to do whatever we can to get somebody else's approval or validation. And the impact of that is significant. Whereas if we're aligned, then we don't need to chase that.
Yeah. And I think that alignment speaks into that purpose driven work, right? When you're aligned in what you do occupationally and professionally, then you're driving in that lane of purpose driven work, which requires rewiring. And this is shifting dopamine from external makers to internal meaning.
Yeah, I like
So,
that. Say that again. From external
yeah,
markers to internal meaning.
yeah, and it's shifting that dopamine, right? That feel good chemical from external makers or external markers, I'm sorry, to internal meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that ties well to what I was just saying about that disconnect, is like you can be getting all this external validation and praise, et cetera, but is that matching what you were feeling inside? And sometimes, like I said, it is, and then other times it's not. So, and I think that that ties into, are you doing purpose driven work into your purpose? Not saying, because I see sometimes how people try to say, well, I work for a purpose driven mission or, organization. Okay, there's lots of those out there, but is it allowing you in whatever your job is to be in your purpose and in your alignment?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the question that a lot of times people forget to ask when they're attached to an organization that's purpose driven, mission driven, which is a lot of nonprofits, NGOs. But that doesn't necessarily mean, because I've worked most of my, before I became an entrepreneur, most of my career in nonprofits. And, so they were all purpose driven, they were all mission driven. But sometimes I was working in my purpose, and many times I wasn't, and I had to come to terms with that, of like, oh, instead of like the being up here and the explanation, when talking to friends and networking and all that. But I'm like, but what am I feeling inside? Am I feeling empty? Am I feeling that what I'm doing is meaningful to both the organization and its cause, but to my purpose? And I think that's the question that a lot of individuals forget to ask.
Yeah. And Jason, I would agree with you because as a coach, and I've coached hundreds and thousands of people over the years, so many people haven't done the work to identify what their internal purpose is. Like, why are you here in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And once you've done that work and you actually can come out with a purpose statement that feels truly aligned to you, then it doesn't matter what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Necessarily, because then you're clear on your purpose. And if, as I said earlier, if you can align the task to your purpose, you'll find fulfillment in anything you do. I use my purpose statement now for everything. I mean, I bought a house several years ago and I ran it through my purpose statement. And I'm happy to share what mine is. Mine is to shine a light on potential and witness magic. Like that's why I'm on the planet, really. Meet people, I shine a light on potential, and I witness the magic of who they're becoming, and I love that. But when I bought the house, I had to ask the question, does this house allow me to shine a light on potential and witness magic? And it did. There was a
Mm-hmm.
space in the back where I could run sessions. There was all sorts of different things, and it was like, okay, this is great. So once you've got that, your true north, your north star, your purpose statement, um, it impacts everything that you do in a positive way. And and it doesn't matter what decisions you need to make, you can run it through your purpose. And at work, like you said, whether you're working with an organization that's an NGO or whether you're working for a corporate organization that's
Mm-hmm.
not, if you're aligned to your purpose, then you're going to feel good regardless of which one you're into or which one you're
Absolutely.
working at. So if I can, and yes, Jason and I are coaches, right? It's what we do for a living. But if you haven't worked on your purpose statement and haven't gotten clarity around who you are and why you're here, do the work.
Yeah.
Hire a coach just to do a purpose session if you need to.
Yeah.
There's so many resources out there, but get really clear on what it is and make sure that your statement's just big enough to fit on a post-it note.
Yep.
Because if it's too wordy, you're not going to remember it,
Right.
right? And you and you need, like you don't want it to be an essay, well, my purpose is blah blah blah. No, it's got to be something that's short, sharp, and succinct, but on point. And I had
Yeah.
to iterate mine several times until I got it just right.
Yeah.
Like I had the flavor, but the wording wasn't perfect. And with a couple of goes around, I can say my purpose statement, I can feel it. And you don't have to share it with anybody else. I mean, I just shared it here just to give you an idea, but it's you. It's a personal thing. You don't have to
Yeah.
share it with anybody, but do the work to identify what it is for you because when you do that, everything changes. And then we're um, less likely to seek external validation.
Yeah.
right? Less likely to need other people's praise. We're more inclined then to have that healthy, soul-driven purpose where we can separate who we are from what we do and actually be in alignment with who we are in everything we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you were speaking about purpose and your purpose statement, right? Like one thing that comes to mind um as a coach, right? Like one of the things that I really work with clients on too is getting really, really, really crystal clear on your values.
Mm,
Because if you are not crystal clear on your values, whether they're your personal, professional, which usually are married at the end of the day in a lot of ways, you know, your purpose statement is not going to be as clear, I think. But if you're really clear on what your values are, then I think you can lean more powerfully into your purpose statement. Would you agree on that,
yeah,
Leanne?
yeah. I think your values, definitely yes. And the reason I say definitely yes is because to feel the best that we feel, we need to have our values in alignment,
Yeah,
right? So if we're showing up in a place that's consistently rubbing up against our values, that's not great. So understanding and identifying your values is super important, and then your strengths. Play to your strengths. Like look at, what am I good at? We talked about this, I think, in last week's, or maybe anyway, with Jitesh, or one of the sessions that we did around, don't look at where your failings are or what you're not good at necessarily. Yes, we can always improve, but
yep,
actually lean into what is my superpower? What am I good at? And that will often give you alignment as well. So your values and your strengths, if you're really clear on the both of those, it makes it so much easier to identify your purpose,
absolutely.
and articulate it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, because that's one, assignment that I usually give leaders who I coach. Um, Almost one of the first assignments out of the door is, what are your values?
Yeah.
Take some time to think about that, both from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint, and see where there's overlap,
Yeah.
and also see where there's not overlap too, right? um and it's just amazing the ahas that come up, and it's like, oh wow, like I didn't really think about that, or like, yeah, like this particular value is really rubbing against this part of my job, and it's just amazing the light bulbs that go off, right? And how the conversation can actually shift to, you know, um, creating that true alignment, creating that living more into purpose and fulfillment. So,
And I find
um,
through my coaching clients, just to that point, Jason, that often when we've got internal conflict, it's
mhm,
because we've got a values conflict.
mhm,
So, to give you an example, I love my work and what I do, and I also love my family. And family is my number one value, right? And sometimes I have this internal conflict about, oh, I want to do that course and I want to do this, but it's impacting on my family life, right? And then we
mhm,
can kind of get into this kind of internal struggle and battle. Um, and that, so again, knowing what your values are, understanding what's going on, and working through those things can really help us in lots of ways, right? Because um, I think a lot of people have done values work these days, and I'm so grateful that it's become normal to do that. But I still don't know that everybody's done purpose work. And if you can do both, do your
mhm,
strengths. What are your strengths?
mhm.
Do your values and then do your purpose work. Then you can show up authentically and happy in all environments.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's an amazing segue for us to talk about identity, right? And um, and how that falls into the area of work. So work can be an expression of identity, but it can't be your source of identity. So I'll say that again. Work can be an expression of identity. It just can't be the source of identity. And
And
I think that's a good,
how many people, you say, oh, tell me about yourself. Oh, I do this for a living. It's
yep,
like, right? It's that is my identity, or for
yeah,
many, many people, right? As
yeah,
opposed to, well, this is who I am and this is what I do for a living. Like they're two
yeah.
separate things, but we tend to group it together.
Oh, absolutely. And, from having traveled around the globe a lot, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Leanne, where, and I can speak from the American experience, right? I mean, what we do is one of the number one questions out of the door, right? When you're, you know, out with a new group of people or out with friends and you meet new people, it's like, oh, what do you do?
Yep.
You know, versus like other questions of like, well, tell me about yourself outside of work,
Yep.
you know? And so I've learned as I've traveled across the globe that what you do is not always the top thing or the first thing in conversation in different cultures. And, it took me a little bit to like wrap my mind around that because we're so wrapped around that here in the US. Um, and so, I think that's where, when you in this area of professional and occupational well-being is that when you do travel, right, do that environmental scan, like get to know what, you know, norms within a culture, like is talking about what you do, like where does that come in the pecking order of the conversation? Sometimes it's like after a couple days,
Oh, by the
like
way.
not the first minute that you meet someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just remember that that identity, that work can be an expression of your identity, but it can't be the full source of it.
And I think that's the tagline for today's session, right? Like, really, if we double click on that, if we can separate ourselves from that as our identity,
Hmm.
we'll have much more joy in our lives for sure, because our identity should not be aligned. And I say should, and I hate saying should because it's one of those words that I don't enjoy. But our identity is so much more. Who we are is so much more than just what we do.
Hmm.
And yet, most of us will hang our hat on what we do as that's who we are.
Yeah.
And um, and I think even in Australia, I mean, you talked about it from the American perspective, but even here, it's the top three questions. Hi,
Yeah.
what's your name? What do you do? You're like name, rank, serial number, right? Like that's what it is. It's like it goes in that order. What's your name? What do you do? Um, and it's so sad. And I will often say to people, so tell me, what do you love about what you do? Or, why does what you do inspire you? And people kind of, you can see them. It's like, but you don't know what I do. No, I don't need to know. I want to know what makes you, what tickles your toes. I want to know what wakes you up in the morning. Um,
Right.
I don't, your job title isn't that important to me.
Right.
But for many, it's so important, like, especially in our hierarchical systems. And,
Hmm.
it's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and two, I've attended some different seminars, right? And really, like one of the things that they say is that people really, at the end of the day, don't care what you do, but how is what you do going to benefit them,
Yeah.
right? Because, like, for example, if you're an entrepreneur and you sell a product, right? They don't care that you're the CEO, the inventor of the product, but it's like, how is this product going to help me? Right. So it's all a kind of two on how you pitch or you can make what you do like more meaningful and exciting, which I think ties into what you were just saying, like the joy and like what gets you up in the morning. And I mean, you can turn those type of uh, experiences into a meaningful conversation where you will get the person more interested in of like, oh wow, like, well, tell me more,
Yeah.
right? So and yeah, and I think that also goes into, that cultural part of the conversation, right? Where it's like, in some cultures it's like, they want to know you as a human first and then get to know what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it should be,
Yeah.
actually. But, that's just me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting conversation. So stop aligning yourself with your title, your role,
Mhm.
and find out who you really are with your
Yeah.
purpose statement, your values, and your strengths. And then watch what happens. Watch what happens.
Right. Well, and I think this speaks well into, right, like this attention management. I think that we were talking with Allison about in episode 3, I believe it was, on mental and intellectual well-being, right? Like so many people we all have so much information and people wanting our attention and all that. And, you know, from an occupational and professional well-being part, right? Like if you're out at a networking event, I mean, you have somebody's attention for 30 seconds before they're thinking of like, oh, I'm going to go get an appetizer to eat, or what do I got to do tonight, and da 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 da. So there's also that part of that I think can connect to your thriving state, right? Where it's like you got to look at how you're positioning yourself too, right? In those conversations to connect with people in those first 30 to 45 seconds to have them ask you, well, tell me more about that, you know? Because from a well-being standpoint, it's like when you're out there and you're networking and nothing is happening. I mean, that can be a kind of a punch on your soul sometimes. It's like, like I have this great product or I have this great service or whatever it may be, and you're really making the effort to go out there to these events and, whether they're online or in person, and just nothing is connecting. And so that can actually affect your professional well-being as well too, is like how you're positioning yourself when you're in these at these events when you're meeting new people. I don't know if you have anything that you want to say on that, but that just kind of struck a little bit of a chord in me. Um, where that those first number of seconds that you have with somebody can be so powerful, or they can be, and they're moving on, even though they're nodding their head at you.
Yeah. The lights are on, but no one's home.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Been there, done that, and have been on the receiving end of that, right? So both aspects. I mean, you made a comment earlier, and I just wanted to adapt it slightly because I think it's so important. People don't remember what you do, they remember how you make them feel.
Yep.
And so if you're at these networking events and you're asking a different sort of question, so tell me what inspires you. Tell me why you get up in the morning. Like that's different from, hi, what do you do? And people will remember you because the conversation was different. I don't know if you've read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Jason.
Mm-mm.
It's by Dale Carnegie, and who I believe is the granddaddy of connection and networking, right? Like the book's been around since, a very long time. And it's been on the bestseller list for like years and years and years and years. And it's a book that I often will recommend to entrepreneurs, business owners, salespeople, because it's about forming connection. And one of the quotes or one of the things it says in the book is that people love to talk about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that you can ask good questions and have people talking about themselves, the more that they feel good and they will remember you in those, after the events. And that first 30 seconds really plays the biggest impact. So, I encourage you all to shift things up. Don't just go into, well, who are you? What's your name? And what do you do? Find different questions to ask so that you can connect
Yeah.
to somebody as opposed to just being a tick box experience.
Yeah. And that what you just said, Leanne, just makes me it just turned on such a light bulb for me because when we were just talking about identity, right? And how work can be a source of identity, just, not the whole thing. So it's like that part of your identity that you bring into work. Like, why not have that at such a thriving state versus like all over the place, right? So it's also getting in alignment with your identity around what you do like to how to message that most powerfully forward versus you know like you're doing this and people aren't following you.
Yeah,
So um so I think there's a lot of work around getting your work identity in alignment and into that thriving state versus kind of all over the place and really kind of not knowing where you're going. um because when you're not in that alignment state, you are definitely not going to be working towards fulfillment.
absolute,
Yeah.
absolute.
And with that, kind of moving into the conversation around fulfillment, um, is the question is how do you find fulfillment where you are? I'll say that question again. How do you find fulfillment where you are? And with that, Leanne's going to take us through the first step around the five neuroscience backed strategies um, on fulfillment.
Yeah. And I've already spoken to the first one a little bit, but I'm going to double click on it because I think it's so important that when you use your natural strengths, the brain enters that flow state, right? It boosts dopamine and it reduces stress, and you can do a whole lot more when you're aligned with your strengths. And it's really interesting because, our strengths can show up in lots of different ways, but I'd recommend even doing one of these psychometric assessments. So whether it's a Gallup or a Clifton Strength Finder or, whichever one that you choose to use, there's a multitude of them out there. But if you can know your strengths and play to them, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
feel activated, aligned, and alive. Like that's the thing. And to do that, if you don't even do one of the surveys, that's completely fine. But what I would encourage you to do also, as well as even better if, is that you track your tasks over the next week, fortnight, month, however long you want to do it. I like doing it over a month because I think it gives you a complete picture. A week, we
Mm-hmm.
can have a good week or a bad week, right? But if we do it over a longer period of time, you're going to have a more complete picture. So track your tasks over a month and then see um, if your strengths align to when you felt good. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want you to kind of manage your energy. Have a look at which tasks energized me, which tasks kind of made me diminished, and then track your strengths. Did I
Yeah.
play to my strengths in that task or in that task? And you'll be quite surprised how when we're working in alignment, when we're feeling energized, it's usually because we are playing to our strengths and stretching ourselves a little bit further.
Yeah. Yeah, and a couple of things on there. I mean, when you were talking about, tracking your strengths, or tasks, right, over a week or month, it's kind of like, when you've had to track your blood pressure, right? They usually just don't have you track it a week because it's like, okay, you can have some good days, bad days, right? But if you track it over like a month, you really see like themes and patterns,
You do.
really, right? Um, and I would also say for those who choose to do the Clifton Strengths Finder, um, one of the things that I did when I worked internally is I actually put my strengths in my signature line.
Yeah.
Um, and I got some really positive reviews, but I did that also to show people like, okay, these are my top five. And so they know like, oh, well, Jason's second strength is communication. So he like really like communication is very important to him, versus like this assumption, right? So and I hoped that people would put their strengths in their signatures. It never really happened that way, but at least they had some kind of micro look-ins to me and my strengths so that they knew how to better work with me or better approach me.
Yeah, and I find that organizations that do that well, that do let's find people's strengths that to help them to play to their strengths and build teams accordingly, have so much more success because
Yeah,
people are feeling energized in their roles because they're doing what they're meant to be doing. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So that moves us into the second one, which is micro adjustments. So with micro adjustments, these small changes can create new neural pathways. And this is called neuroplasticity. So this is when the brain is rewiring itself. Maybe you shift one responsibility, just a tick, right? Like you can shift one responsibility or one behavior or one pattern just a little bit, and it's amazing the difference that happens. Um, and this could be in the area of communication, right? Like maybe shift to have a more kinder tone when you communicate, or um, put in just a little bit more listening to understand versus listening to just immediately react, right? Um, and like I saw this, it was on LinkedIn. It was like the 5 stages of hearing, or not hearing. It was the 5 stages of listening, and it was like the listening to react is like surface level, right? So it's amazing when you look at those levels of listening, how that aligns with how you communicate too. So just doing those micro adjustments, and just pick one over the next week or 2 weeks or over this next month to shift, and see what comes up. um and then before we move into the third one, is also you could choose expand one part of your role that you love, you know um and I think that that also helps people to take pause and a step back to look at that area of purpose and fulfillment, right? Because there might be a part of your role that you totally fill in fulfillment with or in purpose, and then other areas that don't. So those are some micro adjustments to kind of look at and to kind of play around with. But I do challenge folks to just pick one and just try it on for size and see what happens.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I want to double click on that neuroplasticity if I can for a second,
Mhm.
because the belief used to be that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But what we know now after watching the brain in fMRI machines is that we're consistently making new connections all the time, right? We can absolutely. So creating micro shifts, doing things a little bit differently with intention, we can build new habits and new ways of being all the time.
Mhm.
Um, is it harder as you get older? Possibly, because we're so set in our ways and our neuro pathways are already kind of locked in, but it doesn't mean we can't, right? We absolutely can. And I often say to people, anything that we try is hard in the beginning, messy in the middle, and great at the end. So bringing in these micro adjustments, whatever it is, something small that's meaningful, super important. So I just wanted to talk about that because, um, people often say, "Oh, well, it's just the way I am. It's the way I've always been, or it's just the way it is." Well, it is because you're saying that. And if you choose different, you can have different, right? So I just wanted to kind of double click on that because I think it's worth knowing. The third strategy is around values-based decision making. Now, again, if you haven't done values work, go and do it. There's a free assessment that you can do on strengths and values on the internet. Like there's lots of things that you can do. But when your action aligns with your values, the nervous system moves into that parasympathetic nervous system, goes into a calm, regulated state. So we're not feeling jittery and out of control. We're feeling calm, focused, grounded. And when we're in alignment with our values and making decisions from that place, we want to be, when we're making decisions full stop, we want to be making them from that calm, grounded, focused perspective, not from fear or anxiety, right? Because that's going to really tarnish the sort of decisions that we make. And this is why misalignment feels chaotic, because your body goes into chaos internally. But when we're kind of making values based decisions, it's much more grounded. There's less of that chaos in our internal environment, which allows us to make much better quality decisions. So, get your values sorted, work out what they are, and then align all of your decisions through that.
Yeah. Yeah, which leads us nicely into our fourth strategy, which is on connection and belonging. So, from a neuroscience standpoint, the oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone within us, it helps to boost trust, collaboration with others, and that psychological safety that we all yearn for. I think even like the most toughest, person, everyone is seeking psychological safety, even if, whether they want to admit it or they don't. So with that, building meaningful work relationships, that's not optional. It's neurobiologically essential. And I just ask folks to pause, just to think back on meaningful work relationships and non-meaningful work relationships. And there is a difference. And so, I also pause people to, to kind of take this little challenge. You can do it in your head, you can do it on a piece of paper, whatever um is best for you, but look at when look at those meaningful work relationships and see how that bonding occurs within those, and those areas of trust. What did that look like in that meaningful relationship? What did collaboration look like in that meaningful relationship? And also, did that meaningful relationship provide you psychological safety? And I bet you it's a yes on all three. Then if you did those on the non-meaningful work relationships, I bet you all three of those would be no.
Yeah, super important. Like I said earlier, we spend so much time at work. We need to have that community, that circle of community and connection, circle of safety
Yep.
in our workplaces in order to thrive. So it's so important. And the next one is around purpose practices, right? So, what are purpose practices? It's first and foremostly getting to know what your purpose is. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
we've kind of established that that's really important, but also things like reflection, gratitude, intention setting. Like start every day with intention. Like, what is it? Who do you want to be and how do you want to show up? Practice gratitude throughout the day and at the end of the day, and have a reflection practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no greater tool that we can have than reflecting on who we are and how we've shown up. And these strengthen that default mode network and help us to interpretate. It helps us to interpretate our work through a meaningful lens. There's Leanne and her Leanneisms again, but it helps you to interpret your work through a meaningful lens. Like, what happened today? How did I show up? What am I grateful for? What was my intent? Did I live into that? If we can actually go through our day and do those processes, the brain will see more meaning in things, right? So the more we practice, the more we kind of are priming ourselves to look for that. When I first started gratitude, it was, peripheral stuff like I'm grateful for the sunshine or I'm grateful for my family. But the more I practiced, the more I found things to be grateful for. It's the same with intention. If I don't set an intention for my day, I can be a bit wishy washy and all over the place. But when I'm really clear and I set an intention, I show up powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
And when I reflect, I can see what are the strengths, how did I live into my values, and where didn't I? And how can I do better at that so I can be more authentic? So, having these practices really helps to strengthen who we are, and it reinforces motivation, because the more that the brain sees meaning, the more motivated that we are. right? And I think that's super important in anything that we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I loved all those strategies, and I just think, just sitting with each of them, do some journaling, see what comes up for you, just can be so powerful. And um, you know, and I know that we ask our listeners to pause a lot, right? And to take a look at this or to answer this question. Um, so don't feel like you have to do all of that in like 1 week period of time, right? I mean, it's a process, and some things will fit better for you and others won't, right? So that's the that's the beauty in being able to choose. Um, so now we're going to talk about pivoting. And when you think of, a role that you're in, right? Or a role that you've been in, sometimes you outgrow a role. And, everyone has a different reaction around that, right? When you even if you're in conversation about that, right? Of like, oh, it's okay to outgrow a role. And some people are like, oh, no, 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 because, they're just super set in what they like, comfortability, kind of being in this, not one to try new things. But it is okay to outgrow a role. Um, and how do you know neurologically when it's time to pivot?
Yeah, it's a great question because we've all been there, and we get stuck in our comfort zone, even if it's uncomfortable. Right? Because of the
Mm-hmm.
safety and, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But when that stress response becomes chronic, like when your nervous system doesn't recover well, when you feel like you're constantly in a state of anxiety, these are some of the things that you need to look out for.
Yeah. And I think, what you just said, I think speaks to what we talked about earlier is that chronic dread, right?
And emotional fatigue, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, when there's no opportunity for growth, your brain will becomes understimulated, and it'll give you those signals of, you know, um, not feeling fulfilled. When we talked about a little bit earlier about that achievement, right? Where there's no like excitement, etc. So when your brain becomes understimulated, you naturally will become disengaged. And we've all been there, right? I mean, there's plenty of times when I can think of where it's just like, there's no more growth. Like there's no more growth here for me. And they're not using my talents and et ceteras. And sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, it's okay. Like it's time for me to move on. Um, you know, and I can tell where it's like my gas tank is low. I'm feeling disengaged. I'm not feeling motivated. And that's when I've gotten the signals, okay, it's time to move on. And it's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other one that stands out to me, Jason, is when there's a, violently, and I say violently, but, mismatched values. When I've got integrity around something, and then the organization is potentially asking me to violate that. Right? Like that can create a severe stress state in the body because we're doing things that are against our internal kind of wiring of what we believe is right or wrong. And if we do that over a prolonged period of time, that can really affect our health and well being in a big way. So you've got to, you know, ask yourself the question, is this a one off or is this something that's constantly happening where my values are being violated and I'm feeling this sense of inner turmoil about it? Then that's definitely a sign that this particular role may be on its out clause with you and to look for something new. And let's face it, finding new work may be difficult in our environment and in our current climates across the globe. Um, but even if you start now, you might not leave now, but start looking now, prepare, get yourself ready, because you don't want the negative health impacts if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, and that also leads into when you've tried those reasonable changes, right? Those small shifts, but there's still that rub up against your values that you were just talking about, Leanne, which is in the totality, the environment isn't shifting, right? And that's where I think it's important to what you just said. Is this a one-off, or is there like patterns that I really need to take a look at? What ends up happening is that your future self starts calling louder for change, getting into alignment, calling louder to, like, you know, move into work that aligns with your purpose, right? So um I think within those two, it's like, look at, is it a one-off, is there a pattern, and what is your what is you calling? Is it calling to say, hey, this is just a one-off, it's okay, just calm down, take a step back? Or is it something bigger to say you're being called into another area of alignment?
Yeah. And a coaching question that I ask about that all the time is, in 5 years' time, what decision are you going to wish you had made? Right? Like getting out of the now, the here, and I'm stuck. And, what decision would I wish I had made in 5 years if
Yeah.
I'm looking back? And I think sometimes that can really help because it is that future self that's calling you. And
Yeah.
it's a future self that we're trying to step into, right? And we
Yeah.
can't if we're stuck in the mud here.
Yeah. And when you were saying that, like, sometimes looking at your future self could be scary a little bit,
Mm,
right? Because it's like, like, I don't, it's like, do I have enough self courage to, like, step into something greater and something more meaningful, right? um and it's interesting. I was just watching a holiday movie last night on Netflix. And it's where this gal, her and her husband and their two kids, ends up on the doorstep of one of her best friends from college, who's been this huge success, sold her aviation company, was able to retire early, et cetera, et cetera. And then, she was an engineer, an inventor, and, she was in a placeholder job, right? And um, they were having this conversation where the gal who was the engineer, the inventor, she was just like, I just thought that I would be at a different place, and, you know, being able to retire early, do this, and then, and her super successful friend was like, well, in order to get there, you have to believe. Nothing's going to happen unless you believe it can happen. And that's where bringing this back to that future self is like, what you see in front of you could be very scary and exciting at the same moment. And also, you got to believe to make that happen, because we are all put on this earth for a purpose. And there's many ways to live into that purpose. And one is professional, and occupational. And so it's like when you see those calling signs, yeah, they can be scary, exciting, all in the same moment, but you got to have the other ingredients to help move yourself forward. So,
yeah, I agree that self belief um, is such an important ingredient into who we are, how we show up, and how we evolve. Because
mhm,
I believe that our purpose can change over time, and I
mhm,
believe that we might have several purposes: one for work, one for um, your home life, but your overarching values usually remain very similar. And I think
mhm,
if we There was something I wanted to say to that. But to believe is so super important, because if you don't, you'll be stuck.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you've got to take the leap of faith, right? And fingers
Hmm.
and toes crossed and hope and pray, right? That it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
But you've got to take the leap, um, and have faith in your capacity. And one thing I often say to people is that you've got a 100% track record of succeeding, and you know how I know, because you're here now. So whatever you try, if you give it your all and you don't give up, there's going to be success.
Yeah.
You may have roadblocks, you may have speed bumps, there could be challenges along the way, but all of that is part of your evolution, because I believe that we're all here to evolve up. We're not here to be stagnant. We're here to consistently learn, to grow, to stretch, to adapt, and to keep evolving. Um, so thank you for bringing that in, because I think that's really important. The other thing that I want to say about this is that our brain needs congruence. When there's incongruency, we have internal conflict. And if your environment, your work environment, can't support congruency, it's a sign that you need to kind of maybe pivot again. Because
Hmm.
if we're in that stress state all the time, we're going to be impacting or polluting the environment around us, right? Like, we know that you can walk into a room and when other people are stressed, because their energy has already polluted the environment. And you don't want to be the one. You don't want to be the one polluting the environment, right? And so we need to be mindful about, am I consistently showing up in this stress state? Because if I am, it's affecting everybody else.
Yeah.
And we speak about this all the time, because I think we're not aware of just how much. But if you've got a colleague who comes in, and you can tell, if you're aware, whether they're in a good mood, whether they're in a bad mood, whether they're stressed, whether they're happy, whether they might be sad. Like, you can pick up on the undercurrents, even if you might not know exactly what it is. You know that there's something going on, and then all of us start walking on eggshells because of that.
Yeah.
Um, so be mindful, be authentic, be responsible for the energy that you're bringing into the room. And if you can't bring good energy because you're in such incongruency and misalignment, then make the bold choice.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think, one thing I want to add into before we go into the personal stories, Leanne, onto that is, um, like at work, right? Like in team meetings, like there is a, a famous OD practitioner, Edie Seashore, that she was the principal at, I think, the grandmother. I think I'd have to double check this, but I think the grandmother of the check-in, right? So when you're in a meeting, I mean, it could be a one-on-one meeting or a team meeting. Do a quick temperature check to say, let's all go around and let's just say one word of how we're feeling at the moment. It is amazing what you can get out of one word. If someone's like, feel okay, okay, that person may be dealing with some stuff, and you might have another of excited or blah or whatever it may be. And so it's uh that check-in part, I just, for any leader who's listening, just to, maybe put that in your meetings, and your one-on-ones, because it's, and participate as the leader too, because you have what you're feeling in the moment as well.
Yeah. And that's emotional intelligence 101, right? To label what we're feeling also helps to turn the dial down on the intensity of that feeling. So not only are we getting to know our people and what's going on for them, we're also turning the dial down on that reactive or emotional state, which actually reignites their prefrontal cortex so they can actually perform better in their roles, doing what they need to do. Because when our prefrontal cortex comes back online, that's our innovation, collaboration, creativity. all the things that we need, decision making, memorizing stuff, recalling it, all of the things that we need our executive function for, um, comes back online when when we turn down the dial on that threat state or on that emotional state, shall we say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, um, having been a facilitator of like many different meetings, even as a consultant, and it's like I can tell a huge difference when we skip the check-in, even if it's a brief check-in, to when we do it. It is amazing on how much it can ground the meeting. And because I've been, it's like, oh, we don't have time for check-ins, like let's just get to business. And it's just like, okay, but like I want to know what kind of how the 10 people are showing up in this meeting. Like, just take a minute. One word takes maybe a minute with 10 people. Um, so, and if you have more time, you can do a little bit of an icebreaker type thing, right? But just that emotional intelligence at the beginning of a meeting is just so crucial. And I would, also challenge leaders, if you have time at the end of a meeting, do a checkout, because it's just, and it's a practice, right? It's like anything, like when you go to the gym, working out a new muscle, you're like, ugh. But the more you do it, the more it just becomes part of a new norm. Um, and who doesn't want to work for an emotionally intelligent leader,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I've worked for many that aren't, and that's not nice.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I'm doing my research
Yeah.
in my doctorate on leading with emotional intelligence. So I'm fascinated to see what comes out of that in the next year.
Yeah, because the truth is, leadership isn't about what you do, it's about who you become,
Yeah.
right? And if moment by moment, choice by choice,
Yeah.
guided by, that invisible force of your emotional intelligence, and the architecture of your brain. So
Yeah.
the truth is that we need to show up in a good way in order to lead effectively, because if we don't, we're creating chaos or confusion for people. And confusion isn't a sign that somebody's lost. It's a sign that their brain is actually reorganizing for the next chapter. So if you're a leader and you're creating opportunities for confusion in your people, they will be looking for the next chapter. And if you're feeling confusion in your own self, then your brain is kind of looking for opportunities to reorganize for a new chapter as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we speak to that, because this is not about um, it being a failure or that there's something wrong. Like neurobiology shows us that our brain will affect our body and everything that we do if it's not in a good state.
Yep.
And we need to be mindful of this more and more in today's economy and environment where everybody's stress level is already higher than it normally is. It doesn't take much to tip over the edge. So, for your professional and personal and organizational well being, listen to what's going on. Self awareness really is such an important thing.
Yeah. So important. Um, and with that, Leanne, I think time wise, I think we're gonna skip the personal stories, um, which we've kind of given personal stories along today's
I think we've
conversation.
been doing that the whole session today.
so, uh, so that section naturally filled in itself. Um, so, before we go into our book recommendations and our top three tips, just kind of rounding back to this purpose part, right? Purpose isn't a luxury, it's a neurobiological advantage. And I think it speaks to so much what you just said, like Leanne, where like when we're not in alignment, when we're not in alignment with our values, like our body's going to tell us that. You may have a different external facade, but you're feeling it inside
Absolutely.
110%. So, so just remember that purpose isn't a luxury. I mean, it's something that, you know, your body will tell you if you are in alignment with it or out of alignment with it.
And the truth for all of us is that we deserve work that supports our nervous system, that expands our identity and connects us to meaning, and what's important to us. So you deserve that. You deserve work that supports you and your purpose. And it's hard to, if you haven't done purpose work, get onto it. I think we've said that 100 times today. So,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah. Purpose and values work. If you haven't done it, you know, do it. I mean, even if it takes you a few months to like just get into it and just fully get present with, that's okay. There's no timeline to it. Just do the work. And you're going to be so much, you will probably ask yourself, why did I start this 5 years ago or 2 years ago or whatever, and it's something that I think comes up with, like a reevaluation, right? Like sometimes you have to do a yearly check-in on your purpose and values work, and that's okay. I think it's actually kind of healthy, because it actually kind of will show you where you've been out of alignment, where you've been in alignment, and what has changed, you know. Um,
yeah, I don't think
so
it's a one and done. I think it's
mm-mm,
something that's revisited over time for sure.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, so that, purpose isn't discovered just once, folks. It's grown, we revisit, and it's renewed over our lifetime, which is, the joy and the magic of being a human being and not a robot.
On our evolution, shall we say, our evolution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with that, I think we are ready to go into our book recommendations and top tips for
We
the week.
are, we are. Let me just, there we go.
And I'll let you take it away, Leanne.
All right. Sorry, I'm screen issue. Anyway, the first book is called The Way of Integrity. And this one's by Martha Beck. And I just love Martha Beck. She's got such a powerful um, way of communicating. And this book really talks to aligning your inner truth with your outer life. So that inner values, inner purpose with how you show up. So it explores identity, it explores purpose, it explores meaning. It helps readers to recognize the misalignment emotionally and physically, and offers science backed approaches and um, science backed approaches and what's the other word? Strategies is what I was
Mhm.
trying to come up with for that realignment. Whether that's personal well being or your internal world, but that purpose work. So it's really a great book to help you with that internal congruence that I talked about, to turn down the dial on that nervous system deactivation or reactivity, right? So to calm that down and um and to get clearer on why you're here, that soul-centered kind of roadmap. So I would highly recommend The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck.
Awesome. One I'm put on my ever-growing reading list.
Yes. I'm so grateful for Audible. But anyway, go on.
Exactly, exactly. And just a reminder with all these book recommendations, if you are interested in diving into one or a couple or all of them, to definitely check Amazon, um, which has almost anything you can get. And if you're more of an Audible person, to check to see if it's on Audible. So the second book is The Molecule of More by Dr. Daniel Z. Lieberman and Michael E. Long. This book, is accessible it's an accessible neuroscience book that talks a lot about dopamine, the chemical of desire, motivation, and purpose. So it helps to break down why achievement sometimes stops feeling rewarding, like we talked about earlier in our conversation today, and explains why dopamine pathways in identity, ambition, and fulfillment, like why those exist, along with showing how to rewire motivation in a healthier and more aligned way. And I think that's important to on learning how to rewire that motivation in a healthy way that's more aligned. And also, this book ties directly into your segments, um, on dopamine purpose circuits, alignment versus misalignment, and the brain's reward system. So it's a book that's just filled with so many gold nuggets. And definitely we recommended to put it on your reading list or your listening list.
Yeah, it's a good book. The next one is Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And this is a practical and creative framework for designing work with purpose. So it helps you to map your strengths, your values, and your energy. And we've talked about these things at length today. It uses design thinking to build a meaningful career, and it's filled with tools for micro adjustments, um, and for pivoting, right, if we need to. So it's a really good book to help you kind of blend the conversation that we've had today and the idea of designing work that supports your nervous system and knowing when you need to pivot and how to pivot if you need to, and making those micro adjustments to really support your overall well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, and our final book is Your Brain at Work by Dr. David Rock, who is one of the founders of the Neuro Leadership Institute. Um, and this is a book that in my master's program that we actually had to read during our self-development neuroscience portion of our program. And this book practically explains how the brain handles focus, distraction, decision making, and your performance in your everyday work. And it gives you strategies on how to um, be more mindful in these areas and to actually bring these areas to a place of thriving versus a place of um, help you not be successful. So it gives you strategies on actually how to manage all these to be as successful as you can in your everyday work in your career. This book shows how the prefrontal cortex becomes overloaded and how you can protect it because it is a little fussy little being. Um, and it breaks down why stress hijacks creativity and clarity. Um, and, it's just amazing when you just even think about that when you're under a lot of stress and your creativity and clarity are dampened, how much more you go into almost when we speak about mindset, kind of that transactional mindset, that fixed mindset, because it's safety, right? We know versus being in that growth mindset. And it offers brain-based strategies for improving focus, managing your self-energy, and working smarter. There's always that saying, working smarter, not harder. Um, and it uses relatable real life scenarios and stories to illustrate how to apply neuroscience at work. So, you don't have to have all these big certifications and all that, but it actually gives you real life stories and simple strategies on how to apply neuroscience elements during your workday.
Right.
So just and I know this book is on Audible. So there's a hardback version of it on Amazon and the listening version on Audible. So great book. and you know, you'll just walk away with so many great tips.
Yeah. Agreed. And both Jason and I have spent a lot of time with the Neuro Leadership Institute. So we're very partial to the neuroscience in relation to leadership. And
Yes,
David Rock, and this book is one of those books that we've both read because of our personal interests.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll move into our tips. There we go. So, tip number one, right, that I really want to double click on today is to activate your strengths to unlock that flow state and your internal motivation. So, as we've said, when you use your natural strengths, your superpower, your brain enters that flow state, which increases the dopamine, which is that feel good chemical, which then it helps us to increase our creativity, our connectivity to others, collaboration, and that intrinsic motivation where we're motivated from the inside out rather than from the outside in.
Yeah. And our second tip for the day is, which I spoke about a little bit earlier in our conversation, was make the micro shifts to your role, which think of it as neuroplasticity in action. Um, so, you know, make those small intentional changes, which help to create those new neural pathways, and it will just naturally improve your well being. So, you know, like I talked earlier, just take one or two things and adjust them just in a micro way, um, and just, you know, kind of set a period of time, 2 weeks, for example, and see what comes out of those, you know, on the positive side of, oh wow, like making that just that small little millimeter adjustment made this much of a difference, right? So it could be um, workflows, how you communicate, how you collaborate, who you collaborate with, etc. And then advocate for doing more of what lights you up, right? Even if it's 5 or 10%, because if you're in a role and you can just even have that additional 5 or 10% that lights you up and that aligns with your values and aligns with your purpose, just imagine how much more happier you will be. Um, so, you know, do those small changes, advocate for what lights you up. And it is amazing the the new neural pathways that will be created, and you will just feel better in so many different areas of your life.
Definitely agreed. Definitely agreed. I love that. Do more of what lights you up. Um, and the last one today is to anchor your work with and in your values. So we've talked about this today, but when your day-to-day actions align with your values, the nervous system moves from stress into regulation, into thriving. So identify your top five values, or three to five. You know, some people will say three, some people say five. I struggle to get it down to five. But anyway, just saying. But identify your top five values. Make one work decision per week that reflects them. Like really think about that. And because we know that alignment strengthens our brain's identity and meaning networks, creating that sustained fulfillment over time, which allows us to thrive. And really, that's what we want to do. And then once you've got your values, obviously get clarity on your purpose. If I haven't said that enough today, I am going to keep saying it because when we can align our purpose to whatever task we're doing, and we can most of the time, then everything that we do feels good. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I too, Leanne, I have trouble getting it down to five too, you know. Um, Even though I know that, like, you know, kind of that magic number is 3, 4, as far as, like, you know, the capacity of what our brain can remember, you know, to recall
yeah,
in expediency. But yes, so I am right there with you on that. Keeping it down to keeping it below five.
yeah,
Um, Awesome. So let's move into what episode 9 will be on. Okay, so episode 9 is going to be on financial well-being, money matters, security, choices, and freedom. And I will be, and this is going to be a real amazing episode because I will be interviewing one of our financial experts, co-host Leanne Neal, and
And we
possibly
may also have a guest.
and we may also have a guest. So I will be in the interviewer role next week, and really having a great conversation with Leanne around financial well-being and just really getting her wisdom and sage and just some good tips and tricks for all of us, because we are in a very interesting time, right, where financial well-being just looks so different than than in my parents' generation. And so I'm looking forward to the innovative strategies and wisdom that Leanne will share. And this will be next Wednesday, November 26th, LA, 2:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and Thursday, November 27th in Sydney, starting at 9:30 a.m. 80 AEDT time. Is there anything that you would like to put in here, Leanne, since you will be the guest expert?
Not so much. Financial stress is one of the things, it's probably the biggest stressor of everything that happens in our worlds, like really. So bringing some awareness and some conversation around this and making it palatable, I think is really useful. But Jason, I just had a thought. Is next week your Thanksgiving, and do we maybe need to change the date or pre-record or something? I just wanted to put that out.
Yes, I think we will be pre-recording um and earlier next week, but it will be posted
Yep,
on our normal day so that people don't have to confuse their times of when the video, but it will be there will be no video in the live tab next week on our YouTube channel, but in the video tab. So to watch next week's episode 9 on financial well-being, the video will be placed on the regular day and time, but in the video tab only.
excellent, excellent. Well, as usual, I've had a great conversation with you today, Jason, and I love the conversation around purpose because if we're purpose aligned, we thrive. And for me, I'd love for all of us to be in thriver mode. So
Absolutely. And always just love our conversations every week. And I know we could probably go on for a few hours, um, you know, um, since we always just have so much to talk about and stories to bring in and good tidbits of information, gold nuggets, etc. So as always, everyone, thank you for joining us for today's conversation on occupational and professional well-being, working with purpose, finding fulfillment in what you do.
and we hope, as always, that it sparked something new, a new insight, a fresh perspective, or even just a question that you're now considering and find worth exploring.
Yeah. And as always, here at Let's Talk, our mission is simple. It's to have the conversations that matter the most and to remind you you don't have to figure this complicated thing called life by yourself. You're not alone. We are here to have the conversation alongside you. And also, to have fun. Like Leanne and I love having fun on this podcast. And um, there's always the funness, if that's even a word, of being live, right? So the little things that happen sometimes that we're, like internet goes out or one of our screens freezes, but that's part of the fun of it. And we just really um, know that it's important for our viewers that you are getting the authentic Leanne and Jason.
Yeah. Yes. Authenticity is very important. So you get the real, raw, wacky, weird, somewhat eccentric, all the quirky bits of both of us, which is fantastic. So, um, and yeah. So, as usual, if you enjoyed today's episode, share it with others, subscribe, and keep the conversation going with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible
So, let's talk
with real conversations.
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you next week.